Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka from our studios here in London. Over the next half an hour, we'll be looking beyond the business headlines by giving you in-depth perspective on the stories that are affecting all of us. Coming up on today's show, the dollar price of Bitcoin has risen, fallen and risen again over the past few months. Coupled with the mounting concerns over the energy usage of cryptocurrency mining, has left economists asking if the currency can come out of its shadow as being a sideshow in financial markets. I'll be putting this question and more to Simon Dixon, the CEO of banktothefuture.com. He'll be joining me from the Isle of Man. And the leading Pan-African communications consultancy and press release distribution service, the APO Group, has recently signed an exclusive agreement with Getty Images, geared to change the global perspective of Africa. I'll be speaking with APO Group's founder and chairman, Nicolas Pompigné-Moniard. He'll be joining me from Lisbon, Portugal. Then later, I'll be reporting on the biggest company news stories of the week. But first, let's start the show with business news from here in the UK, where the Office for National Statistics revealed UK unemployment has fallen for the fourth consecutive month as businesses took on more staff in response to the relaxation of COVID-19 restrictions. The UK unemployment rate fell to 4.7% in the 3 months to April, representing about 1.6 million people, a modest improvement from 4.8% in the 3 months to March. Separate data from the ONS released on Wednesday morning showed that UK inflation figures hit 2.1% in May, up from 1.5% in April, and far above economists' expectations of 1.8%. The cost of fuel, clothes and eating out have all been cited as the reason for the upward pressure. In other British business news, Prime Minister Boris Johnson announced this week that COVID restrictions in England will continue for another month. Under the final stage of a plan outlined by Johnson earlier this year, he had hoped to lift most social restrictions on June the 21st, meaning pubs, restaurants, nightclubs and other hospitality venues could fully reopen. The much anticipated step has been pushed back to July the 19th, as there has been fast growth in new cases caused by the Delta variant, first discovered in India. A group of Tory MPs are furious over the 4-week Freedom Day delay, over concerns that the country's return back to normality will be pushed back even further. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by our business correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, I don't think anyone was really surprised, were they, that the Prime Minister went back on his word and halted the easing of restrictions further?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. There have been multiple briefings, really, people leaking things to the press, and so yeah, pretty much everyone knew this was going to happen, and there's a lot of protests in the days leading up to that decision, that it's now going to be the 19th of July when possibly there'll be no more restrictions in place. I think Boris was really stuck between open up everything and then have to lock down again, which we all know he doesn't want to do, or do what he's done and delay by 4 weeks. And I think this was sort of the best bad option for him. It's all because of this Delta or Indian variant, which was much more transmissible, about 60% more transmissible than the previous variant or the main variant. It makes up now more than 91% of COVID cases across the UK. And the total number of cases is around, well, just beyond 42,000. So it's something that's been growing. And I think they were looking at the fact that, you know, hospitals could become overrun in the coming weeks if it continues at that kind of rate. The reaction has obviously been pretty bad, especially in areas of the right-wing press, with various newspapers saying that Boris has bottled it, and you know, it's obviously a crippling blow to parts of the industry, the music industry, hospitality, nightclubs, etc. One thing that I think quite a few people are surprised by is that there have been no new measures announced by the Treasury or Rishi Sunak to kind of help those industries. The government point to what's already in place, the furlough scheme, which is still in place, but that is going to start tapering off next month in July. Employers are going to have to start paying 10% of furlough, and then it's going to end in September. So I think a lot of people were sort of surprised that further measures weren't introduced. There are some positives, though. More than 71 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines have been given out. 55% of the adult population have received both of those jabs. And what this delay, I think, does is it gives a bit more time for the rollout of the vaccine scheme to double dose as many people as possible. And I think what the government are hoping is that that will mean that less people could catch this even new variant, and there'll be less people going to hospital, and it will just give them a little bit more time to then be able to open up and say we can safely open up. There are also these trials ongoing about a third booster jab. Now, this is still sort of quite a lot of unknown about this, but it's supposed to give even more protection against coronaviruses and maybe new variants in the future, is to have a third jab. So I think hopefully in a few weeks we'll know whether or not that really does make people even safer, and maybe just more of a kind of, I guess, that feeling of security for people who maybe weren't ready for things to be thrown open, because there were quite a few people, I think, not ready to go clubbing, not ready to have mass sort of indoor things. But it's obviously really, really hard for lots of those businesses that rely on people, theatres and music and bars and nightclubs, to have to go through another 4 weeks without, as I said, any more financial support from the government.
Absolutely. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you.
The rising energy usage of blockchains has recently been facing increasing public scrutiny. Most recently, Tesla CEO Elon Musk announced that the company would suspend vehicle purchases using Bitcoin and only resume once mining shifts to more sustainable energy sources, while Tesla studies other, more efficient cryptocurrencies. Simon Dixon, the CEO of banktothefuture.com, is joining me now from the Isle of Man for more on this. Simon Dixon, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. It's been a pretty up and down and up again couple of weeks for Bitcoin. The dollar price of Bitcoin has been erratic, to say the least, over the past couple of months. What have been the trigger points, in your opinion?
Well, from my perspective, having been involved with it for over a decade now, it's pretty much Bitcoin as usual. But people like to find reasons for it, and the reasons is that we tend to have lots of news-driven announcements. So every year we get new adoption cycles where new people come along, and they may not be used to the volatility that we experience in this asset class. So recently there was announcements from China restating that Bitcoin exchanges are not allowed to operate, and certain companies are not allowed to operate in China. And then more recently, Elon Musk and Tesla brought to the front a debate around the environmental friendliness of the process for creating Bitcoins, which is known as Bitcoin mining, which consumes a lot of electricity. So people like to speculate on the short-term value based upon these adoption cycles that we've been experiencing for over the last decade.
Absolutely, you're right with the headlines. There was one headline I read from one professor saying that Bitcoin alone consumes as much electricity as a medium-sized European country, probably more than the Isle of Man where you are. The FT also recently labelled it as a dirty currency. How much of a worry is this going to be for investors?
The reality is that Bitcoin rewards people for being the most economically efficient. So while electricity is the mechanism for securing the Bitcoin blockchain, which is the way that people verify all the transactions and how it exists without needing a central bank or a government, the reality is that you get rewarded for the more efficient you are. So Bitcoin uses a lot of wasted electricity, and now it's brought to the front a conversation around a race for innovation around the most environmentally and economically efficient ways of mining Bitcoin. So it's actually the opposite. The second thing to think about is its comparison with the traditional financial system. So people think of Bitcoin as an alternative to central banking. And central banking is a vastly inefficient and inferior financial system, mainly because the excessive money printing and the fact that banks create all the money as debt and the effect that all the indebtedness has on society, as well as the fact that most wars are funded through this central banking mechanism.
Thanks for mentioning the central bankers, because that goes pretty nicely into my next question. Some say crypto, bit of a sideshow to the real financial market, quote unquote. Do you think this is too dismissive? I think I know what your answer is going to be. And do you think there will be a time where central bankers, including our very own Andrew Bailey, will finally take cryptocurrency seriously?
Most already do, but the headline is that if you admit that Bitcoin's something to be interested in, it's kind of like saying, you're giving a green light to everybody, and the job of a central banker is to protect their currency in order to meet some of their goals. So you wouldn't expect a large country or a country that has a dominant currency like the United States or Europe or the Great British Pound to be saying anything friendly about Bitcoin. In reality, you've got countries like El Salvador that now are accepting it and saying that it is legal tender, and a wave of countries. So Isle of Man, where I am, in 2014 was the first government to try and make Bitcoin legal tender and support the industry. Really, Bitcoin is David meets Goliath. So I believe in forecasts that we're going to have massive currency wars, which we already have, but they're going to become more prevalent in the future, where currencies are being used as a mechanism for power and suppressing countries, and Bitcoin's their play there. So the companies that have adopted it sooner, yes, they take higher risks, but all the financial people that I know, and I've been involved when I was the first investment banker to speak at a Bitcoin conference over a decade ago, every year more and more of them are into Bitcoin, and what they say at the front and what they actually do is what's important. So I believe that central banks right now are accumulating Bitcoin. They're not just announcing it. And that is the definition of a world reserve currency, is that central banks are using it as some of their reserve assets. Countries are already allocating some of their electricity to mining Bitcoin, and each and every year we get new adoption cycles. Banks and central banks have tried to dismiss Bitcoin for a long time, but now you've got crypto-friendly banks, you've got exchanges that are becoming larger than some of the largest banks in the world, and they're entering into banking and just applying for their own banking licenses. So this industry isn't going anywhere. And the longer a country dismisses it, the more likely they are to be. A quick case study is Bulgaria. Many years back, they confiscated a bunch of Bitcoins from a criminal organization. If you take the value of the Bitcoins that they confiscated, they're actually worth more than the entire national debt of Bulgaria. So although those corrupt Bitcoins disappeared into the corrupt officials as well, it shows that countries can actually wipe out their national debts just by holding Bitcoin and doing what individuals have been doing over the last 10 years.
Goodness me, I'm getting very excited speaking to you, Simon. I think Channels Business Global has stumbled upon a cryptocurrency scholar. I'm just trying to calculate in my head how much Bitcoin you're probably sitting on. Before I let you go, Simon, again, I think I know what this answer is going to be, but explain it for the simpletons of us. Is Bitcoin the future of money? If it is, how is it going to transition into becoming? Give us a kind of a sci-fi conclusion, if you can.
Yeah, so to answer that question, it's about the difference between Bitcoin and banking is that with a bank, when you deposit your money with the bank becomes the legal owner of your money. The second thing is they spend it as they choose, and they create it every time they issue a loan. Bitcoin is the opposite. So Bitcoin allows you to own your own money, to spend your own money peer-to-peer, and its supply is completely fixed, so there's no political interference in the money creation process. Now, I don't think that Bitcoin becomes just the only form of money. The reason for that is because Bitcoin historically has gone up in value for 12 years now, and so therefore people are reluctant to spend it. With their traditional money at a bank, they're very they're happy to spend it because it tends to go down in value over time. So I think in the future you have central bank digital currencies, which are just digital versions of currencies that we have now. We have the removal of cash and coin, and we have Bitcoin, which is an alternative, sucking up savings and rewarding people that save, and traditional money will still be a way and a mechanism for spending. So I do think you have both. But I do think Bitcoin is the future of people's savings, an exit from the traditional financial system, and something that becomes the demand just goes up and up over time for money you can own, money you can spend, and money whose supply is fixed.
Wonderful. Really great analysis from you, Simon Dixon, CEO and co-founder of Bank to the Future. I know our viewers in Nigeria will be very interested in what you have to say, because you may or may not know, but Nigeria and Bitcoin have a bit of a love-hate relationship at the moment. Simon, thank you so much for joining me on Channels Business Global. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Coming up on Channels Business Global, I'll be discussing the APO Group's new partnership with Getty Images with the founder and chairman of APO, Nicolas Pomponnier-Mongnard. He'll be joining me from Lisbon, Portugal. See you after the break. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a few minutes, I'll be discussing the APO Group's new partnership with Getty Images with the founder and chairman of APO, Nicolas Pomponier-Mognard. But before then, here's some company news for you. 4 Toshiba executives, including 2 board members, have been forced out of their positions after a heated emergency meeting. Activist investment firm 3D Investments of Singapore wrote an open letter to Toshiba urging the individuals to resign. This follows last week's publication of a damning 147-page independent report into the company's collusion with the government to suppress activist investors. 3D has a 7.2% stake in the electronics giant and is trying to promote a private equity takeover bid. The ousting has plunged one of Japan's most famous industrial names even deeper into a governance crisis. British telecoms group Vodafone has chosen Samsung Electronics to supply its 5G network equipment across the country. This is the first time the South Korean tech giant will supply its network kit to Vodafone, and it's the first time it has secured a deal with a large European mobile operator for 5G equipment. Samsung's network business has been making inroads into major markets in recent years as the West has turned its back on Huawei over national security concerns. Vodafone's deployment will initially focus on 2,500 sites in the UK, making it one of the largest 5G deployments in the world. America and the EU have agreed a truce in the 17-year trade dispute over subsidies for Boeing and Airbus. Under the agreement, both sides will remove taxes on £11.5 billion of goods, including wine, cheese and tractors, for 5 years. As part of the deal, the EU and US agreed to provide research and development funding through an open and transparent process, as well as to not give specific support, such as tax breaks, to their own producers that would harm the other side. The leading Pan-African communications consultancy and press release distribution service, the APO Group, has recently signed an exclusive agreement with Getty Images, geared to change the global perspective of Africa. Nicolas Pomponier-Mognard, the founder and chairman of APO, is joining me now from Lisbon, Portugal, for more on this story. Nicolas, it's always a pleasure to have you on Channel's Business Global. I'm in London, so you can't be in London and not have heard of Getty Images. We're in Paparazzi Central here in the UK. Can you just tell us how this partnership with Getty came about and how it's going to help change the global perspective of Africa?
Well, as you may know, Juliana, we signed our first partnership making APO Group the strategic partner of Getty Images in Africa back in 2019. And since then, we are working very closely with Getty. And we share a common vision. We want to use our businesses, our company, to change the perception the international media have about Africa. And we have the tool to do that. By spreading good news about the continent, by spreading image which are positive for the continent. We believe that we can influence the narrative. And so basically the idea is APO as a press release distribution service, as a public relation agency, is disseminating a lot of content from corporations, African corporations and multinational corporations, which are active across the continent, international organizations, and you know, most of that content is positive because when a company is issuing a press release, it's usually to announce, you know, a new investment, the opening of a new office, launch of a new product, etc. So it's always positive for the continent. And the agreement we made with Getty is that it's quite unique. It's actually completely unique. For the very first time, not only all our clients, APO Group press release distribution client, the client will distribute press release with APO will be able to have their image, the image associated with the press release, made available on Getty Image, so made available to the 1 million Getty Image subscribers, but also the press release. So the 1 million subscribers of Getty Images across the world. We're talking about 35,000 media houses which have newsrooms, which have direct access through terminal to Getty content, will receive and have access to those image about the African continent, but also to the press release. And so the idea is that with that partnership, we believe, by making available all these good news, images and text to all these media across the world. The idea is that APO Group and Getty Images are joining forces to change or influence the image of the continent, the narrative about the continent, one image and one press release at a time.
Absolutely. It's so important. I've worked in dozens of newsrooms, and if you are an African working in a Western newsroom, you're always desperate for them to use a positive image of Africa, and if it's landing in their inbox, then of course there's no reason why they won't. I really want to talk about perception of Africa and your opinion of how Africa has been perceived during the pandemic. There were so many negative forecasts, Nicholas, at the start of the pandemic from all the international groups. Bodies were supposed to have been piling high on the streets. Billions of Africans were supposed to have died from COVID. We haven't. What do you think? How has the narrative been? From a PR perspective, how have we managed to cope?
Well, it was a reminder that if you are, for instance, WHO, and you have all those tips to give for the population, sometimes and most of the time life-saving advice and tips, it's not enough to post them on your website or on your social media. You have to, and you can only rely on the media to spread the news. If those institutions we are not able to rely on the thousands of media across the continent to relay the information, well, there's those information will never reach the population, right? But I think it was interesting because it reminded everyone the importance of a strong, healthy media landscape. And you can be the strongest, the most well-funded international organization with 50 staff in your PR department, etc., etc. You can have the best possible messaging and message, etc. If the African media are not there, the radios, the TVs, the journalists, etc., to relay, to convey the information to the population, you are voiceless, in fact.
Yeah.
So I think it was an interesting reminder.
Yes. We're running out of time, Nick, but before you go, I've got to ask you how the APO Group have fared during the pandemic. We know there were a lot of losers, but gosh, there were some winners. We've been discussing that on this programme for several weeks. In fact, throughout the pandemic. I know you've recently done another partnership with the African Union of Broadcasting. What is the state of the comms sector? Briefly, Nick, thank you.
Well, what we've seen is in several instances in different industry, several people mentioned that pandemic has acted as an accelerator of the tendency was already there, a trend was already there, and it's accelerated something. I think it's very much what happened in the comm, if you wish, sector, in the sense that multinational companies, corporations, started to, it accelerated the phenomenon, readjusting their mix marketing versus PR. So you see less blatant advertising. So I'm the best, I have the best service, etc. Less blatant advertising and more PR. We certainly see that in the press release distribution industry. So we saw that more and more clients are decreasing their marketing budget, advertising budget, and increasing their PR budget, and the service which is coming on top is definitely press release distribution. With in 2020 at APO we recorded an increase of more than 20% of the press release distribution business, and 30% in volume of the number of press releases distributed.
We're very fortunate, Nicholas, that you've taken out your time to speak to us from beautiful Lisbon in Portugal. Nicholas Pompigné-Monniard, the founder and chairman of APO Group. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Juliana. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Sadly, that's all we have time for today, but do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channels Business Global. Goodbye.